Welcome to the Fruity Knitting Podcast. This is episode 28. I'm Andrea.
And I'm Andrew.
This episode is featuring an interview with Monique Boonstra, a lace knitter extraordinaire from the Netherlands. You may know Monique already through her blog or Instagram as A Passion for Lace. She is a truly talented crafter and she's got some good stories to tell.
Our guest on Knitters of the World today is Anneli from Hamburg, Germany. Andrea has prepared a short tutorial on how to shape while staying in pattern, and we've got a lot coming up on under construction, I hear.
Yes.
You can find all of our show notes at fruityknitting.com. We've got all the information about all of our guests and everything that we mention. You can find it all there. Before we kick off here, I do want to point out this is actually a podcast about knitting, right? This is something we really do try to focus on, the craft of knitting. Andrea is having a little break from her knitting at the moment because she has tendinitis in her elbows from her obsessive knitting. You can see her work on earlier episodes. There's plenty to show there. This is something from Andrea and that's something from Andrea. But to stop Andrea is really struggling with not knitting, I'm policing her. To keep her distracted, she is doing some sewing projects, which is also interesting.
Yeah.
So tell us about what you're doing, Dal.
Yes, I will. Okay. I did show you last episode a dress which I had sewn and it was partially successful, partially because I used the wrong material for the wrong pattern. I should have known this as a knitter. You don't use the wrong fibre or wrong yarn for for a pattern. Anyway, so I used a cotton with 5% elastin instead of a jersey fabric. So the fit around the shoulders and the arms just wasn't really successful. I do want to make that beautiful dress again. And I found some jersey fabric that I totally love. This here, do you like it?
Yes, Dolls. Lovely.
Good. So I'm going to try that dress again, but before I do, I will redo the bodice. I will sew the bodice up in this ugly jersey fabric just to make sure that I get all my mistakes out on this. And
that's a good idea, Dal.
Yes, and then it's a gauge swatch.
Oh, right.
And then I have success on this beautiful fabric, which I'm looking forward to.
Yep.
In the meantime, I found this amazing and slightly overwhelming spring fabric to make another dress with a different pattern. And I've nearly finished it. All I have to do is the hem. It's extremely colourful. It's a beautiful fabric, actually. It looks like it's just a photograph.
Yeah, it's very detailed in some spots.
Yeah, like this
clear.
Rose here. It's just beautiful.
Yep.
Yeah. I think it's because I can't do any knitting colour work that I'm getting slightly frenzy in my choice of fabrics to sew with.
Yeah, so you're doing colour work, but you've got more than two colours in each row there, Dal.
I absolutely do.
It's not strictly traditional.
No. Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about it. It's the very easy Vogue pattern with a princess shaped bodice, very fitted bodice and wide skirt. So in that way, it's very similar to the dress that I knitted, that I sewed last episode. Do you want to just hold it for me?
Yes.
And I'll explain the construction of it a bit. So for any of you who don't sew, a princess line just means this, it's got this panel, or it's got this shaping here and here. So the front piece is in 4 sections. You've got a little bit here, this, there, another section coming down here and here. Sometimes this middle section's just one piece, but I've got a seam in my pattern down the front, and there's a zipper at the back, like that.
And is it similar, same 4 parts?
Yes, 4 parts in the back.
So
so you've got a piece. So it's just this shaping here, which actually works really nice on any fitted bodice. It just gives it a really lovely finish. And we've got a collar, and it's lined. So I'll just open it up and show you. I love the lining because it covers up all of the seams and makes everything look really beautiful and neat. And it also feels a bit glamorous when you put it on because it's silky like underwear.
Right. It certainly looks glamorous when you put it on. And I have to say, you say this is did you say it was a very easy pattern?
It says here, very easy Vogue.
Very easy Vogue. It's pretty detailed for a very easy pattern.
I thought so.
With lining and a collar, and I mean, I suppose you have to finish somehow.
Yeah.
And all these different panels.
It does. And the skirt of it's got 2 pleats here. So there's a little pleat here in the front and another one there. And there's a seam down the front, and then the back is just A-line. So I think it's a lovely design. It's very beautiful, fits well, but it hasn't been without its fitting dramas, I have to say as well. Before I get onto that though, the pattern says it's good for linen, lightweight denim or broadcloth, and I used the same material that I used in my previous dress, which is this cotton with 5% elastin. It's quite a strong or a heavy cotton, and it works really well with this design. And isn't it great to have the correct material with the correct pattern?
Yeah.
What a joy. The first thing I thought is, how do I pick the correct size? And I measured my bust and waist, and I picked size 12 thinking that it still might be too small for me actually. And when I sewed it all up, it was way too big for me. So I thought, I don't understand that at all.
You thought it was going to be too small based on the measurements that you had?
Based on the measurements that were written here, yeah. Okay. And so then I did my searching on YouTube, and I found a really excellent tutorial put out by McCall's Patterns, by one of their pattern writers and cutters. And I think McCall's might be connected with Vogue. Yeah. And she was doing it on another dress, but it still had the princess lining. And the first thing that she said to do, which I thought was very interesting, is she said, when you're measuring your bust, put the tape measure underneath your shoulder blades, so down low, and then up above your bust here, and measure that. So it's underneath your shoulder blades at the back, and then up here like this. And that'll give you a more correct measurement of your actual chest frame. I think the logic behind it is that when you're doing something that's a really fitted bodice, it's so important to have your skeleton or structure, the body frame to be fitting. Yeah. It has to be fitting here, it has to be fitting down here. And you might be very large-breasted, but have a smaller frame than me, for instance. And so you want to be, first of all, working on your frame, and then you add sections for your roundness, wherever that is. So that's the first thing that she said, which changed my measurement completely. And then she said, if you have got a choice between 2 sizes, go to the smaller size, which is interesting as well. And then she showed you how to take your pattern pieces and to tissue fit, which means you take your pattern pieces and you pin them to your body as if they were material. So I don't know that I've even got the right ones here to show you, but you would pin it like this and these pattern pieces have got the seam allowance in them. And so you would pin it with the seam allowance outwards like that. So you tissue fit your body with the pattern. And the pattern pieces have got all of these cutting lines everywhere so that you can cut them open and slip in extra tissue paper for adjustment. So if you need to have extra bust width, or if you've got a slightly forward sloping shoulder, it shows you how to do that. Or if you've got a long or short waist, or like me, you've got a hugely sway back. Mm-hmm. And so the basic frame is correct, and then she shows you all of the cuts that you can do to these pattern pieces, and then she takes it to the board and shows you how to insert extra material, extra tissue paper. So in the end, you've got these tailor-made pattern pieces for your body. Then you put them on your material and cut them out, and you've got very little adjusting to do afterwards. You just simply sew up the seams, and you've got a dress that pretty well perfectly fits you. Yeah. I had already cut out my pattern pieces and my material for this dress.
The size 12.
Yes, so before I found this wealth of information, so I couldn't directly apply it. Yep. It'll have to wait for my next dress. Yep. But I thought that was very, very interesting. So here I am with my bodice in size 12. I cut it out and I sew it up, and it's massively too big for me. And my daughter, our daughter, Madeline, is presently doing her Abitur exam, so that's final year, and she's looking for any excuse possible to avoid studying. So this is when you were away on a business trip, and so she happily spent time pinning me up. She was really getting into it. So I took a massive amount in on the side seams. I also had to take in parts here on the shaping of the princess bodice, because it was gaping here. And I've got an incredible sway back, which means that you actually need less material in the back than you do in the front. So she and I spent time doing this. It was a great mother-daughter relationship. She got so into it. She was trying to smooth down all of the creases, and she was making darts in here, and we had an argument. I said, look, you can only make tucks and darts where it's possible for me to sew.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing how interesting other things can get when you've got hard work to do.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, she was the one who was saying, how's your dress, Mum? Try it on again. Yeah. So there was many hours of trying it on, pinning, looking in the mirror, trying to see how's this going, how's that going.
It sounds like a good thing for me to be away from.
Yes, it was. Particularly because you would have been telling her to get back to her study.
Yeah, although I would have been thinking, if she goes, then I have to do all of this.
Yes.
I would have had to think about that one.
Better her than me. So I am looking forward to hemming it, and then hopefully if it's warm, I'll wear it next episode and you can study the fit. Some of our viewers have said that they found it difficult to work an all-over lace or cabled pattern and at the same time decrease for the waist or the armhole shaping or the neck shaping. And typically for a pattern like that, it'll say, or it'll write, continue working in pattern and at the same time decrease for the armhole shaping as follows. And the problem will be that you'll start to do the decreasing and then you won't have the correct stitch count to continue on your cable or on your lace pattern repeat. And the pattern itself won't tell you what you have to do. So you're left there to make your own decisions on how you're going to work that. And that's where the difficulty lies. So I've made a short tutorial where I've taken projects or knitting from my own projects, and I'm just showing you things that you consider so that you can start to feel confident about making those decisions yourself. It's a very short tutorial in 2 parts. We'll have the first part now and the second part later on in the program. So I hope it's helpful for you. Many designs have an all-over pattern in lace, cables, or some other interesting stitch texture. When the time comes to shape the waist, the armholes or the neckline, you're expected to keep the established pattern going in spite of a changing stitch count because of the increases or decreases. So you have to let go of the idea that the pattern is going to tell you exactly how to do this stitch by stitch. And then accept that you have to make it up yourself. And this isn't as difficult as it sounds, because your knitting's actually going to tell you what you need to do. By the time you get to the shaping, the decreases or increases in your design, you've usually worked enough of the pattern to know it pretty well. And so you feel confident to make it up yourself, just start asking questions like, what looks good? Is my pattern symmetrical? How can I make my decreases and increases and still keep the pattern as symmetrical as possible? And probably the biggest problems will happen in all-over lace and all-over cabled patterns. So let's have a look at the cables first. When the decreases and increases are interrupting a cable, the question is, do you still make some kind of twist or just knit those stitches in stockinette or the background stitch that you're using? The finer and busier the cables are, the easier it is to make it up because it'll be less noticeable whatever you do. For example, on this sleeve of Andrew's jumper. So the sleeve was knitted from the cuff upwards in the flat, so there's a seam here and there's also a seam here, and that's where I had to decrease for this combination set-in sleeve and saddle shoulder. First of all, look at your cabled pattern vertically and see what it does vertically. This one, you've got a series of little twists that sort of form circles. And then parallel to that, you've got a series of double twists and this little motif here. And that is just simply 4 knit stitches, 2 are twisting under the other 2, and it's done twice. So you've got that here, here, here. And then up here, I have to make the decision, do I have enough space to do a twist? And I could have done a second twist here, but I chose just to simply knit those 4 stitches and not do a twist. And the reason why I chose that is because, first of all, it's under the armpit and no one's going to see it anyway. And secondly, every time you do a twist, it naturally narrows the fabric. And because this is under the armpit and going across the top of the arm, and that's an area where you do need extra ease, I chose just to leave it and knit it flat. On my vest, the cable pattern is larger, and there are 3 panels of cables, and each cable has 20 stitches in it. And on the outside panel, you can see my waist shaping. So always look that everything is lining up vertically with the middle of your pattern. So this cabled pattern here, in the middle of it you've got 4 knit stitches and 2 are cabled off to the right forming a branch and 2 are cabled off to the left forming a branch. And as I decrease for my waist shaping here, it's the decreases are eating into the right branch of this cable. But I always make sure that the center division is lined up in the correct spot, and that just keeps the optical look of it correct. When it comes to increasing again, I just keep knitting. Like here, for example, I didn't have quite the right amount of stitches I needed to cable this panel over. So I just knitted it in stocking stitch, and by the time I got to the next repeat, it was okay and I could continue it, and gradually each repeat gets longer. This is a very classical looking cable. We've got 2 of them lying side by side. Let's just forget about the right cable and look at the left one. That's a cable that has got 12 stitches in it. There are 12 knit stitches, and we've got 6 stitches crossing over the top of another 6 stitches. So that's a 6-stitch panel crossing over a 6-stitch panel underneath. Just imagine that my armhole shaping was going to eat into this cable. The main thing to do is to keep the rhythm of the cable vertically the same. So keep twisting at the same points. That's important. If you come here and you don't have 12 stitches to twist, you might only have 10 stitches to twist, then I would try to make the breadth, so the width of the panel going over the top, the same as the one before. So I might have 6 stitches going over 4 stitches. And then it'll look closer to what's happening down here. By the time I get here, if I've decreased even further and I might only have 6 stitches on my needles, I would maybe do 4 stitches over the top of 2. You could also do 3 over 3, but you just optically try to keep it matching the best as you can to the pattern that's going down vertically. Sometimes the decreases can be worked more towards the middle of the fabric so that the cable will remain intact. So instead of doing the decreases on the edge of this neckline, the decreases are done on the inside of the cable here. So it's just regular knit 2s together, and that will keep the cable in its same form all the way up. So sometimes you can do this yourself. If you want to add an extra twist, you could just move your decrease in a little bit from the edge so you can do another twist and keep the pattern going in the same way for a little bit longer.
Hello, my name is Anneli. I am from Germany, where I live in the beautiful city of Hamburg. Knitting is my passion. I've been knitting for 45 years now, and I don't seem to get tired of it. In fact, I might be a little addicted. When I was a child, my mother tried to teach me how to knit, I remembered so well, because we were sitting on her bed and my hands were so cramped that my little piece of knit work turned out to be as hard as a stone and my needles were bent. Things have improved and I am very happy that I've been given the chance to introduce my knit work here. I mainly knit sweaters and cardigans, often to a pattern, but I have found out that a pattern to me is more a source of inspiration. I'd like to design my own garments, and I've done that already. I've designed some sweaters and cardigans, and I'd like to improve that and learn more about it. That is my target. Well, let's see what I can show you. First of all, I'd like to show you Harriet. This little cardigan has been designed by Kim Hargreaves. Kim is one of my favorite designers. And this cardigan has some details which inspired me to knit it. For example, the peplum, the collar, and the cuffs. I also like its feminine style and this typical red chic, which I like so much. As recommended in the pattern, I used a DK tweed yarn. The whole cardigan has a simple moss stitch and the cuffs and the collars were knitted in garter stitch. I thought that the edges might be a challenge, but they turned out to be very simple and I think they are really eye-catching. Well, this is one of my favorite sweaters. I like knitting cables and traditional Aran patterns. They are great and they are interesting to knit. This sweater I also knitted according to a pattern, but I had to change it slightly and to modify it because I used a different yarn. The yarn I used is soft classic merino yarn, and I usually knit merino yarn very tightly because I've noticed that after washing it might turn out a little softer and it can sag a little and the sweater can even get out of shape and nobody wants that. The next project I'd like to show you is one of my own designs. Judy will present it to you. As I said, I like the British style. I like tweed, checkered patterns and leather buttons, and I wanted to create such a sweater myself. Because I was not sure how this project would turn out, I used simple sock yarn and I think it came out alright and I might knit it again with a nicer yarn. The correct tension was most important. After I had done that, I could calculate the number of stitches and rows, and I could calculate everything by using the rule of 3. I knitted colored stripes and embroidered the vertical lines after finishing it. I have to confess that I'm a little proud of it, and this jacket goes very well with pencil skirts and also with jeans. Do you know how warm it is outside? It is really warm. This sweater is also one of my own designs. At first I wanted to knit a simple striped sweater, but while knitting it I decided that I might like to have a unique color and also unicolored sleeves, and I added some lines afterwards when I'd finished it. The sweater was knitted with 2 strands at a time, and I used very soft mohair yarn. I like mohair because it doesn't pill. And when I had finished the sweater, I had so much yarn left that I decided to knit a matching scarf, this time with 1 thread only and with very thick needles. So I think it goes well together. And when I had finished that, I said, maybe some fingerless mittens might be nice too. And I found someone who knitted them for me. Matching mittens. I think it goes very well together, and now my outfit is complete. Well, this sweater is a quite different project. When I saw this oversized sweater designed by Kim Hargreaves, I was not sure whether it would suit me at all, because I usually knit figure-hugging designs. But when I saw all these horse cables and the soft yarn, I was very tempted. And I also liked the side lacing and the ties. And so I knitted it, and I'm quite happy with the result. It is such a cozy and warm garment that you don't want to take it off once it is cold outside. But right now it's very warm, and I'm happy that we have spring and I can present you my latest project. Well, spring has arrived, and I've been inspired by a fine open work pattern. This is the little sweater, my present project. The yarn I'm using has a sparkling effect, which gives the sweater a real touch of glamour. I think I will like it. The sleeves are unicolored in a different yarn. They are knitted in a lace yarn made of mohair and silk, and will be a nice contrast to the open work. So with that, I can say thank you, Fruity Knitters, for allowing me to present my work. I hope you have a nice day, and I say tschüss from Hamburg.
Thank you very much to Anneli for that contribution today. If you've ever done a podcast for yourself, a video podcast, or for the other guests who have been on Knitters of the World in our other episodes, I think many people experience that it is significantly more difficult to sit in front of the camera and do your presentation than you may have expected. I thought Anneli did a really good job of that, particularly considering that this is not her native language. I certainly know for myself, when I have to do any sort of a presentation or speak in German, it's just that much more difficult, even if you really speak the language quite well. So I thought that was great.
Yeah. Anneli's projects don't really need a lot of explanation. They're very beautiful on their own. But she said it very eloquently, even though she probably rarely uses English.
Yeah. I did
thank
think,
you.
Yeah, and I did think you could see the thought and effort that Anneli has put into getting the style that she's after. She's obviously after something quite special and gets that result very effectively.
Yeah.
So under construction, the next thing is my Drachenfels shawl. I wanted to mention very quickly, our UK viewers are probably familiar with the television documentary series 7 Up. It's been going for about 40 years or 50 years now, I think, or even longer. For the US viewers or anyone else who's not familiar with it, this director found a group or took a sample of 7-year-old kids a long time ago and looked at them, asked them questions.
All different social levels.
Yeah, different people in the UK, and looked at them, and comes back every 7 years and sees how they're going. And in each episode, you're thinking, all right, what's going to happen in 7 years with this person? I feel like if I was on that show, everyone would be saying, is Andrew going to be finished his shawl in the next episode 7 years from now? But I am actually getting through it. I'm expecting to get this blue section finished today, and then I'm kind of on the final part. So
we'll give people a very quick look. It is very hard for me not to just hassle him about his knitting, since I'm not knitting myself.
What would you hassle me about? My knitting is beautiful here, dolls. I don't understand.
I would be telling you to get a move on all the time.
Yeah, I am getting a move on.
Yes.
Anyway,
okay.
It is beautiful.
Well done. Keep at it.
Yep.
Lace patterns are combinations of decrease and accompanying yarn overs that create holes in the fabric. And in order to keep a consistent stitch count, which means a consistent fabric width, most lace patterns group the yarn overs and the decreases in pairs or sets. So each decrease is balanced by a corresponding yarn over. But in some patterns, a yarn over may be separated from its balancing decrease by several stitches, or it could even be on another row. So every yarn over must be compensated for with a decrease. And if there aren't enough stitches for both the yarn over and the decrease, don't work either of them. So work those stitches instead in just the background pattern, so which could be stocking stitch or reverse stocking stitch or garter stitch. For example, in this red cardigan, I've got a flower pattern in a really basic lace. If I stretch it out, the flower pattern is just a circle for the flower, and then underneath we've got a leaf going to the right and a leaf going to the left. And the middle of the flower, there's just 3 knit stitches, and the outside edges there's knit 2 together, which is a decrease, and a corresponding yarn over, and that's what causes these little eyelets and the pattern. So on the side of the cardigan you can see I've got a little bit of mild waist shaping. But if I take this flower here, I didn't have enough stitches here to do a decrease and a yarn over and also have a solid edge for me to be able to seam here. So I just chose instead to knit here, just do simple stocking stitch so that I could have a neat seam. But you can still see that it is partly a flower. You've got a little bit over a half of the flower here and 1 leaf going to the right and the start of the leaf going there. So that's just a judgment call. This jumper is knitted from the bottom up in pieces and seamed. So it's seamed down the side and seamed on this raglan sleeve. And the body of it's got a lace pattern, and it's got these holes in it here which are just decreases and their corresponding yarn overs. But when we get here, because I've got a decrease here for this seam, I didn't have enough stitches to do decreases and their corresponding yarn overs, and it would have also made it a little bit sloppy because of the holes. So I just chose to keep knitting in the background stitch, which was reverse stocking stitch, and that means that this line down here, or this seam, was going to sit neater. Likewise on the sleeve, it's a basket weave kind of stitch pattern here. If you don't know where to start when you're on the outside edge of a row, go to the middle of the next pattern repeat. Line that up and work out what you need to do on those stitches. And then you can fudge these stitches more, or it'll give you an idea of what you can do with those. This is an all-over lace top, and I had to decrease in pattern for the sleeve cap. So if you have a look at this pattern here in its long vertical lines, you've got 3 knit stitches and then a double decrease here that brings that panel into a fine line with its corresponding yarn overs, and then again it's brought out to 3 knit stitches, and then again you've got this line of double decreases. When I follow that up here, I should actually be doing double decreases here, but that's too close to the seam and it would also just make the seam unstable, so I just simply knitted it in stocking stitch. You can't really tell, so that's just another judgment call. The final thing I want to talk about is edge stitches. So you just want to think about how your seams are going to look after you've done your shaping. And as I've talked about before, I love to backstitch my seams. And one of the reasons is because I think it makes it really easy to do a beautiful finish. So I always knit the first and last stitches of my row on the right side of the fabric and the wrong side of the fabric, and that makes my edges really neat and firm and easy to stitch together and do a backstitch. So on this raglan sleeve, I've backstitched here, and you can see that the pattern runs very smoothly to the seam, both on the lace and the basket weave, and it creates a really beautiful seam that's very neat. On the inside, that's what it looks like. On Andrew's jumper here, which was knitted in pieces, I have backstitched the underarm, which is a set-in sleeve, and the saddle shoulder here. And I cast off in steps here. So that was casting off about 6 or 7 stitches and then another 6 and 7 stitches, so you've got a little step effect here. But because I back stitched it, it's really neat and you can't see that. So the stocking stitch is going straight into that line, and the reverse stocking stitch here is also going very well into that line. It looks really neat. The inside of it looks like this. But if you don't want to backstitch and you much prefer to mattress stitch your seams, it's a good idea to work the decreases and increases in a stitch or two from the edge. So keep 1 or 2 stitches right on the edge the same all the time and don't involve them in any changes. So work them in the background stitch pattern, which could be stocking stitch or reverse stocking stitch or garter stitch or seed stitch, whatever. And then when you come to mattress stitch the seams up, the seam will look neater. So every pattern is going to be a little bit different. But if you learn how to combine what the pattern's instructions are with what your knitting is telling you visually, it'll all work out. And after a bit of practice, it actually gets to be quite fun and you get quite a freeing feeling about it. We're coming up now to our interview with Monique Boonstra. And those of you who have entered the lace garment or hat cull, you're going to find her so inspiring. And if any of you are fans of the TV series Outlander, there's also an interesting story in this interview for you. I particularly admire Monique because behind her perhaps modest or unimposing exterior is an extremely talented knitter with exceptional skills, very, very thoughtful. I think she's a little Dutch gem that the knitting world needs to know a lot more about. So I was super proud to be able to interview her.
I saw a thing on Twitter and it was an interaction and the guy was saying, "What do you see as your greatest strength?" And the interview candidate there said, "I just quietly get on with the job." And I thought
exactly, that's
that
Monique.
fit here.
She gets on with the job.
Yeah. Yeah, not announcing it to the world too much.
Yeah, she's not announcing it to the world, but you look at her and and she's doing incredible stuff.
Amazing stuff.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And one of the things that I love to do when I'm editing is try to find music out of the very limited source that is available to us, that's not copyright, that somehow represents the character or the essence of the personality of one of our guests or the mood of their work. And Monique went to the opera when she was a child quite a lot, and she says that when she's designing her patterns, she takes the main motifs and they're like the divas, and then the accompanying motifs or patterns that she uses in her designs are like the opera chorus, which support the main roles. And then the background fabric of her designs is like the stage where the whole cast are presented on and the story is told, which is a lovely description. So I had a lot of fun picking out a beautiful aria to accompany her exquisite lace work. And I picked out an aria. Aria just means song. It's from the opera Romeo and Juliet, and that's by Gounod. And it's based on Shakespeare's famous play, obviously. And the aria is a waltz, and it's sung by Juliet after she's been dancing at the ball where she meets Romeo. It's Je veux vivre, which means I want to live. And she is full of ecstasy for the joy of being young, of being in love, and full of life. And so I really hope you enjoy the music, that you enjoy Monique's exquisite lace work and the interview.
Before we go on to our interview, I wanted to say thank you to all of the people who have become patrons in the last month or so, and everyone else who became a patron earlier. We love being able to produce this show and make it available for free, but we do depend on some level of financial support, and Patreon is the way that we do that. So thank you very much. If you want to join the crew of people supporting us in this way, we are getting towards our 500 founding patrons, and we're also getting towards the first goal that we set for ourselves. You can check it all out at patreon.com/fruityknitting. You can find the link below or at fruityknitting.com.
Yes. And thank you to all of our viewers. We really appreciate that you spend your time with us, and we look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks. So goodbye for us and enjoy the interview.
Yeah, thank you very much. We'll see you in the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.
Je veux vivre dans ce rêve qui m'enivre ce jour encore dans ces flammes. Je te garde dans mon trésor. Je veux vivre dans ce rêve qui m'enivre ce jour encore dans ce flamme. Je te garde dans mon trésor si tu veux.
Welcome to the Fruity Knitting Podcast. My guest today is Monique Boonstra from the Netherlands. Monique's passion is fine lace work. She knits on commission and also makes designs for others to knit. Her designs are exquisitely beautiful and highly skilled. They've been featured in various craft magazines, including Twist Collective and the Dutch magazine Handwerken zonder Grenzen, as well as being shown in the lace collection of 2012 by Jamieson and Smith in Shetland. During the day, Monique works as a postie for the Netherland Post, and her other passion is riding her motorbike. So in her own words, she has lots of fresh air and time to come up with new ideas and designs. I've been admiring her work for a while now, and as you know, we have a lace garment and hat knit-along happening. So it's a real pleasure for me to be able to interview Monique today. Welcome, Monique, to the Fruity Knitting Podcast.
Hello,
It's great to have you with us.
nice to be invited.
So Monique, how did you first get interested in lace knitting, and in particular fine, highly skilled lace knitting?
I've been crafting for most of my life. I wasn't taught to knit at a very young age, but growing up, I learned and got more skills as I went along. I was very curious and looked up things in the library and got into the very basics of lace. And by the time that I was in high school, the knitting kept on going. I knitted sweaters and mittens, and then when I was in my early 20s, I got children and I got a daughter, and that got me interested in lace knitting again. And I started knitting with cotton because that was available. I just got more interested and learned about new yarns, especially abroad, and got those in the mail and started knitting and watching Ravelry and copying things and trying things out and changing things.
And you also mentioned earlier at some stage that you found Sharon Miller, the book,
Yes.
her book, and read that, and she influenced you?
When I was on Ravelry, people got to know me because I already had a blog and was networking a lot and visiting other blogs. And there was a lady that was interested in my work, and she gave me the Sharon Miller heirloom knitting book. And she said, "Here's the book, it's for you. Make me something out of it." So that was my first big commission with Shetland Lace. And because my husband is an international truck driver, he's away a lot. He's almost always away from home for 2 weeks at a time. So that gives me lots of time to knit.
You also took a trip to Shetland, didn't you? And how did that ignite your interest further?
Well, I knitted my first Shetland tea shawl in 2008. And then the commission knit was in 2010. And in 2011, I heard for the first time of the Shetland Wool Week, but I wasn't able to go. And I saved up because I wanted to go next year, but they didn't even know if there's gonna be one. So I continued knitting my lace, and then was asked in 2012 to design and be a part of the lace collection by Jameson and Smith. And that made it for me a bigger encouragement to go to Shetland myself. And I attended my first Wool Week in 2012.
And that must have been very inspiring.
Yeah, because by that time I had done some research and looked at the internet and at the Shetland Museum and archives files, and I saw the lace, and I had made myself familiar with the patterns and with the style and the construction. But when I was actually in the museum, I was literally stunned by the size, because I had thought that was very large, but it was also very, very, very fine work. The stitch count per inch was incredible, and so I was very much impressed by their work.
And I also heard that you, because of an injury, you were able to still knit quite a lot with lace because it's very lightweight. So tell us a bit about that.
Because I have to go to work, I started to do some cleaning. I was a cleaning lady for 12 years, and that messed up my wrist a bit because of all the twisting of the cleaning cloth. I got a repetitive strain injury, and I got a brace for my hand, and that meant I couldn't keep a lot of weight on my hand. So knitting was the choice, and lace was obvious because I could knit a very large piece without weighing it very much and straining my hands any further. So that's what I liked. And I started knitting shawls because size doesn't matter. If the shawl is a bit too large for the person, it's not that you have to make it fit like a garment. So that's why I chose to focus on the shawls.
And some of the shawls are so light, aren't they? Like you can, the Shetland ones, they pass through a wedding ring.
Indeed, yeah. Well, the shawl on the mannequin is the Shetland square stars shawl, and it has 4 kilometers of yarn in it, and it weighs only 250 grams.
That's amazing.
It can't pass through a wedding ring, it's a bit too much, but if you would work it in finer yarn, as they did back in the days in Shetland, it certainly would have been able to fit through a wedding ring.
Yeah, so lace knitting has actually been a tradition in a few different cultures. So are you able to tell us how the traditions differ? For example, how would an Estonian lace shawl differ in its characteristics or motifs to a Shetland lace shawl?
Well, in Estonia and in Russia, in Orenburg especially, there were also lace knitters developing patterns. And because I am an observer, I like to observe things and deconstruct them. I observed that the patterns from Orenburg are much more square and mathematical, and the patterns from Estonia have nubs. That's a little bubble with more stitches in one stitch, and that results in more yarn per shawl. And it gives a little accent in the shawl, because that way you can make an arc or a curve, and then you get flowers or a cross or a heart, and they really accentuate the lace pattern. And the bonus for the people from Estonia was that the more lace yarn was used in a shawl, the more you got paid. So when you add more nubs, each nub can go up to 8 centimeters. Then, for instance, with the shawl with 1,200 nubs, you get more yardage, and so you get more paid without ending up with the blankets.
That's amazing, isn't it? And what kind of materials were used? Because I heard there's goat down or something used in Estonia.
The Orenburg shawls are known for being worked in goat down. The Estonian shawls are knitted with wool, as are the shawls in Shetland. The Shetland yarn is from the Shetland sheep, and because they're out all day, every day of the year, every year, their wool has a particular characteristics and makes it very suitable for knitting fine lace. The story goes that the women in Shetland, and specifically on the island of Unst, used to pluck the neck hairs of the sheep, and then they spun the yarn all winter, and then when the yarn was done, it was very, very fine. I always say it was 3 hairs plied, and
Wow.
yeah, it was incredible. And then they had all year around, all the rest of the year, because spinning takes up a lot of time. Believe me, I've practiced. And then they knitted the shawls.
So Estonian designs have more geometrical shapes. Do Shetlands also have geometrical? Are they more plant or sort of like motifs based on nature?
A lot of things in Shetland lace design have nature names, or things that are familiar with the islands. And even though there aren't many trees on Shetland, there are some tree patterns, and zigzags and bird's eyes and spider webs and beads and strawberries, and they have a very specific name for each thing, and things are still developing.
Yes, because there are so many beautiful and fragile patterns in nature, and you can see how it's an endless source of inspiration. So when you're designing, is nature also a source of inspiration for you? Are you using these traditional motifs and rearranging them in your own designs and styles, or are you also inventing completely new motifs?
Sometimes I try to combine new patterns. I usually start out with a design by choosing a certain pattern and then working from that. I used to go to the opera when I was younger, and I compare it to that. The opera has a few
Main roles, yeah, main
Indeed.
characters.
Yeah. And I tried to give a pattern a main character, like in the Shetland Stars, the stars were the main character. And then you have to have support actors and a stage to put them on. So you have a main pattern feature, and then you work with that to support the pattern.
That's a lovely description. The kinds of yarns that are used in fine lace knitting. I've heard that some lace knitters really just want to work with wool. Why is that? And what do you prefer to work with? So, yeah, talk a little bit about that, and also maybe talk about how you use colour in your design, like what kinds of colours show up lace better, and if you can even do what kinds of colour work is possible in colour, in lace knitting.
In my opinion, I think color can be very important to support the pattern, because when you use lighter colors, then the pattern comes out better. If you have a shawl that is like this and the lace is very delicate, you need to be able to see it while you wear it, because otherwise it would be not a waste of your time, but it's less charming. And the reason why I and most people use wool, because of tradition. If you knit a Shetland lace shawl, you might as well knit it with Shetland wool, because that's widely available. And they just got a new yarn made especially for the lace. And when you start out with something like this is a cone from Jameson and Smith. And after you have made this shawl, you are...
Wow.
that's left. But sometimes I make designs, and if I do want them to go through a wedding ring, I use a little bit of finer yarn. I have here the Habu. It's 100% merino, so also again wool, because it's bouncy, it has good qualities. Back in the days when they have a Shetland shawl in the 1850s and 70s, they used to call it a cloud, because it was as light as a cloud and it stayed around you like a cloud. It was airy and warm, and yeah, it was light and available, and it dyed up pretty easily. And also what you have is 100% silk. This is even finer, and I've knitted this shawl with it, also with Shetland patterns. And the thing with silk is that it's not only very light, it is also very slippery. So you have to make a wise choice what to make with it. And this shawl weighs only 28 grams. Because the yarn is so
exquisite.
fine.
That is so beautiful, yeah. And how long would it take you to knit something like that?
If I have a single commission, probably 4 to 5 weeks or quicker. That depends on things, what happens.
Can you use sort of very delicate color gradients on do you get yarns like that are thin enough and good enough to work for fine lace knitting?
Well, the Jameson & Smith one-ply gossamer comes in a variety of natural colors, and I'm one that thinks that you can add and use those colors, but within gradations, in saying the border has a dark color and the edge has a darker color for Shetland black, and then the border is gray and the center could be white. So then you have a use of colors without distracting too much from all the work you put in knitting the lace.
And I suppose if you do want to knit a dark shawl, you have to really wear it on very light clothing, don't you?
Yeah, indeed. And even when you're knitting one, I always suggest to my students when I give classes, you can knit a dark shawl if you have enough light and put something light on your lap so you have a bit of reflection of the light so you can see better what you're doing. Colors can give it a real more of a dimension, because when you wear it, it's not always like a garment, like flat. It's almost always wrapped around you. So if you add a little bit of color, that gives it a bit more dimension.
And you're also an experienced teacher and you enjoy teaching workshops. So when you're teaching at a workshop, what are the typical challenges with fine lace knitting that your students have, and how do you help them?
I first start them out by calming them down, because although the yarn can be very fine, once it is knitted, it won't be likely to break anymore. And I tend to tell them that I work very close to the points of my knitting needle, so movements are very small, and then you become a bit more quick. And you have to fixate the stitches with your fingers so they don't slip off the needle right away. So you have to lock them down and then pick them with the needle. Also, I tend to pull at the fabric that I'm knitting, because by then the stitches open up and the needle goes in more quick, because usually there are a lot of stitches on the needle and I have to get through that needle to get to the next and end up with the shawl. So I try to tell them that the stitches need to be opened up so you can make the knit togethers and the yarn overs. Also, people are often pretty scared about the fact that you have to count a lot. And then I try to teach them the following things. Oftentimes lace is charted. That's a chart with symbols, and oftentimes the symbols reflect the motion you have to do. A slash forward could be a knit two together, and a slash backward can be a slip slip knit. And that means that you have action. And I try to tell the people in my class that when there's just a knit stitch, that's sort of a background. That's something you have to do to get to the next action. Also, stitch markers can be very handy, because then you get a sort of a rhythm. In each row there is a certain rhythm in the lace, like knit three, knit together, yarn over, and then so and so on. But for instance, when I was working on the Shetland Stars, there was a repeat of 58 stitches. So you need a bit of a stitch marker and handle on things on getting those stitches in the right order, in the right way.
That's beautiful.
So that's a long rhythm, but most often the rhythm is shorter, 12 stitches, 15 stitches. So that's a bit more easy. And with those stitch markers, you don't have to count as much, because you need the rhythm. And once you get the hang of the rhythm, then it becomes more easy. Also, when you look at the chart, then when you really look at the chart, it will tell you in which direction you're going. You're going outwards or inwards or upwards with the lace. You take a left turn, a right turn, or you're going stack stuff on top of each other. When you do that, I try to let the people see what is happening on your needle. And when you have watched the chart and it's saying you have to go outwards, then when you're knitting it, you can expect to go outwards. So the direction of the knitting and your knitting work is telling you what's coming. And that makes knitting easier too.
Yeah, so the charts are really helpful on a visual concept.
Yeah, because the stitch is longer than it is wide. And if you would make a chart the same size as your knitting, you would see that the yarn overs would be in the exact place where a yarn over is in the chart, or when the direction most of the time is going.
And I can totally understand what you mean by getting in a rhythm of things, because I do that with stranded knitting as well, with colour work. And it actually helps you move through the rows quicker, doesn't it? Because you sort of...
But the thing is, it changes every row. And with Shetland lace, it's even, say worse, because you don't have a purl row to go back to and make all the stitches even again. And that way, most of the time with Shetland knitting, because there is no front and no back due to the garter stitch, you can be working on a zigzag on the front and start on the back with a bird's eye or a spider web. So it runs on different levels in one row, and that what makes it challenging.
Wow. Okay, I didn't know that. That sounds very, very exciting, actually.
Yeah. And the bonus of Shetland knitting is because it is very stretchy due to the garter stitch, you get a bit of a bonus. You, for instance, knit a shawl that's 150 centimeters, and you can block it up to 170 centimeters.
Well, I can't wait to see some of your own designs. So you're going to show us about 5 or so of your designs, aren't you? So let's have a look at them.
Back in 2015, there was a series on the television that was called Outlander. I wasn't aware of it at all, and usually I watch a lot of stuff on TV. That's good, especially timepieces with original clothing and scenery and stuff. And somebody called Laura made me aware of the fact that in episode 9 and in episode 12 of the series, the main character Claire was wearing a lace shawl. It was a Shetland knit shawl, and by the time I got around to it, luckily a local TV broadcaster was airing the show, and I was able to look at the shawl, and it was only briefly in the scenes. But the thing was, once the camera zoomed out, the lace pattern got lost.
Yeah.
And a lot of people watching the show are recreating stuff that the costume designer was making. Wrist warmers, shawls, cowls, mittens, a lot of things. But the Shetland lace shawl that she was wearing was exceptional. Nobody was able to recreate it because of the camera zooming out. And because I'm pretty well known for copying things and making things from picture, they asked me if I was able to help. And with stills of the scenery, I was able, with a lot of help from others, to determine sort of the center pattern, because they zoomed in for a bit and we focused the scene and we were able to make out the pattern. But as soon as the camera zoomed out, it wasn't visible anymore because of the lightweight of the shawl. We could determine that it was a square shawl, and there was only one thing to do. I was bold enough to tweet the costume designer of the series, that's Terry Dresbach, and I tweeted there was a shawl in episode 9, and we were asking if it's still available to you, and tell us a bit more about it. And I thought, honesty is the best policy. I might as well say that I want to recreate it. And the first thing she said, "You must be mad." And I said, I get that a lot. But it was a big square lace shawl. And I asked if I was able to have a sort of a picture of a part of the shawl so I can make out the pattern. And I wasn't really planning on another big shawl, but, well, I could at least try to help the other people to recreate it. And then Terry took a few days to search for it, and I got a reply with a quarter of the shawl in the picture, and that was all I needed. And I said thank you, and I say I will now make my goal to recreate the shawl. And it was indeed a square shawl, but the surprise of the whole thing was that there were stars in the shawl. I haven't seen those before, I thought, and later on it appeared to be that I had seen them in the Shetland Museum and Archives in a similar sort of pattern, but with other support patterns, and there indeed was a star in the shawl. And I started to do my work, what I do best, and that's recreating and counting and swatching, and that is what the large swatch was for. I made a shawl swatch to try out every part of the pattern that was in the shawl as far as I could see in the picture that Terry gave me. And there is a pretty star. And I made the shawl swatch especially this large because then I could calculate, especially with the other calculations I've already made, how large it would be and how much yarn I would need. And I calculated, I'm just naming a number here from the top of my head, that each stitch would weigh 0.00071168. There were more numbers behind the comma, but I didn't worry about them, and I calculated that I would need approximately 3,950 meters of yarn, so I rounded it up to 4 kilometers. And then I started knitting, and I kept people updated on the progress. And then I thought, there are a lot of knitters in the world, just like that, and only part of them are lace knitters, and only part of those are Shetland lace knitters. They're able to do the techniques that you need to make the shawl. And so I also tried to recreate the shawl in a rectangular shape, so that not everybody would have to knit 4 kilometers of yarn to recreate the yarn. But because I wasn't able at the time, due to other commissions, to knit also a rectangle shawl, I had several very skilled test knitters, Susan and Dominique, and they made the rectangle shawl for me, so it was also available to the people who didn't want to knit the square shawl. And then I got to casting on. That was July 8th, 2015. And I cast it off at July 8th, 2016. And I had sent Terry some pictures of the shawl and to show them that was actually doable.
That's an amazing story. It's so exciting.
The shawl size is 6 feet square, and it's worked on 2mm needles. And the construction is you start with the edge, and then you work the border, and then you work the center.
Okay.
And then you leave it on a spare needle, and then you work the edge and the border again.
That is so gorgeous. That's so exciting. Looking at your work, it really makes me want to get into lace knitting.
I admire your work because you knit sweaters and I can't do that, so it's a bit heavy on my hands. And in retrospect, this is a lot of stitches. And like I said, with the weight of each stitch, I was pretty close with the amount of yarn that I had guessed I would need. And the thing is, when you weigh a swatch and you get the weight of each stitch, that's okay. And you have to have a lot of numbers behind the comma because there are more than approximately 500,000 stitches in this shawl. So each time you add more stitches, the comma shifts to the front and then you need more yarn. Yeah. And when you use a lot of yarn with a cone like this, then you've got plenty. But when you use single balls, then it can be quite precarious if you have enough or not.
So what else have you got to show us?
During my time knitting the Shetland Star Shawl, I was also commissioned an apron. And this was a very special apron because the lady that knitted it had knitted it for the Queen of Holland back in 1927. And she had been working on it for a long time, and she had used a Herbert Niebling pattern, probably the Lily. we don't know for sure because I couldn't find it and the museum couldn't find it either. And the peculiar thing was that she made the apron out of a sort of a tablecloth pattern. So she used a lot of adaptations to make it an apron. Because I am pretty skilled and know that certain patterns can only be worked in one direction, I was able to tell that she started in the center, made a band, then knitted for when you're wearing it downwards, and then left that, then knitted a center from left to right with a mesh pattern, and then grafted it to each other, and then made an edging all around. But because it was very, very delicate worked lace, and because the museum had it on display, it could only be on display for 3 months, and then the mannequin would be empty because of the exposure to light. The yarn could decay and fall apart. And because I'm pretty well known for making a deadline and my skills came into play, I was asked to recreate the apron. And I used the same Shetland gossamer yarn that I used for the Shetland Star shawl, but this time I worked with finer needles. The main part of the shawl with the lily pattern was worked in 2 millimeters, but the mesh part was worked on 1.5 millimeters. And because that was so fine, and with the repetitive strain injury I have, it can be sometimes very daunting to hold on to those fine needles without bending them and messing up the work. So to make sure that I had a stable piece of fabric without large holes and loops, I also used my knitting belt.
The Shetland knitting belt.
Yes, I worked with very fine needles and I made a very fine swatch. This is a part of the pattern.
Very beautiful.
And this ended up to being a collar I was asked to add to the apron. So in January I was asked to make the apron, and at the same time I was working on the Shetland Star shawl with the same yarn.
So are you saying that, for instance, the pattern there that you showed us, it's not, you don't have the relief of purling on the wrong side, that every side, both sides are always worked?
Yeah.
A pattern's always worked into it. So it's
Yeah.
kind of reversible, is it?
Yes, oftentimes the Shetland Star shawl is reversible, as is often most Shetland lace. It's not very common for Shetland lace to be in stockinette lace.
And have you got anything else you can show us?
Well, the other shawl that I showed just recently, and the one in silk, I've used the Shetland mesh pattern, which is very stretchy, as all Shetland lace is, but now in this design, it's very delicate. I have pushed it a bit to the edge because it has little hearts on the side.
Oh,
And
beautiful.
it's a semicircular shawl, but you knit only a quarter, and it stretches up so much that you end up with a semicircular shawl. The pattern comes in 2 sizes, and with the little hearts, when it's constructed in a way that you carry it and that the hearts drape down your shoulder in the same direction.
And is that something you've knitted for yourself, or was that a commission?
No, this is one I knitted for myself as a showpiece.
You have so much knowledge. So have you basically been learning this knowledge yourself from books, or were you able to meet a traditional lace knitter of some culture and work with them for a while?
I learned by observing the Shetland shawls that are on display in the Shetland Museum and Archives website. I take a closer look as far as that goes, and then I went to the Shetland Wool Week 3 times, and the most significant one was in 2014 when there was an opening ceremony and the people of Shetland had a display of their work, and I got acquainted with Ina Irvine, and she had a wonderful display of fine Shetland lace. and that really changed my view of things because I knew I had to go finer. And she was a very skilled knitter and very kind and told me a lot of things, and that really influenced me in my skills and my work for making it even finer. And I like the construction of the Shetland lace because that's open for a lot of things. You can knit Shetland outwards, you can knit inwards, or you can, the semicircular shawl isn't an official Shetland shape, but I like that challenge.
That is wonderful. And just tell me briefly, because we have to finish up, what is so attractive for you about going finer and finer with the lace knitting?
The thing I found when I was in 2014 in Shetland, it felt like if I would go finer, I could reach through the glass of the museum and actually do what they did. I can't spin as fine as they did, but I can try to knit as fine as they did. So it's really challenging. I know the patterns by heart, so I don't have to look at the charts all the time, and it comes natural to me because I do it so much, and I really, really love to do it. And it's my goal to recreate more shawls that are only known from picture.
How wonderful. You're so inspiring. I have to say, it's rare to meet somebody who is so knowledgeable, and I would love to take a workshop with you. If people want to take a workshop with you, how can they get in contact with you, or what do they do?
Usually I'm invited by a local yarn store, and they have the location and the yarns available to use, and that means I've been giving a workshop in the whole of the Netherlands, in North and South, and on big fairs and on small locations, and I've been to Belgium once. So if I can travel, I have even been asked to give a workshop in the Shetland Jameson & Smith store during the last Wool Week in 2016. So if you ask me, I will come.
Well, I think you're an absolute treasure, and I think it's some of the major festivals, yarn festivals, they should snap you up. Anyway, it's been such a privilege to have you on the Fruity Knitting podcast, and I'm really grateful that you agreed to be interviewed. So thank you, Monique, and I wish you all the best, and I'm really excited to see and follow what you come up with next.
Okay, thank you, Andrea and Andrew.
And so let's say goodbye to the viewers now.
Bye.
Una furtiva lacrima dagli occhi suoi spuntò, quella fastosa giovani in vidi or sembrò. I
And our guest on Knitters of the World is Anneli from Hamburg in Germany. We have a short tutorial. Andrea has prepared a short knitting tutorial on staying in shape while you are working in pattern.
Yes.
Yeah.
You've yet to look at it. Staying in shape. Come on, let's start again.
Okay.